Well, joining us now from California is the journalist and author Christopher Hitchens, a regular contributor to Vanity Fair magazine and the online journal Slate. Christopher, thanks for being there. What must be, if I can put it this way, an ungodly hour for you?
Yeah. Yes, well, nice to be back.
Can I start by getting your assessment of what's now being called simply the Barack Obama race speech?
Yes. The one thing he wasn't in the speech was the one thing he claimed to be, which was unequivocal. Let me put it like this. It's one thing for Jeremiah Wright to say things about Hiroshima, to say things about the white power structure and so forth. But what the guy's actually gone around saying is that AIDS is a deliberate government policy, that it's only because of white power that there are drugs in the ghetto. That's part of a conspiracy too. Very, very wild and paranoid and sordid stuff that explicitly and totally negates everything Barack Obama says about how the black community must take responsibility. And those remarks have not in themselves been condemned. He says he's unequivocally condemned remarks he hasn't even specified yet. And then, I don't know how it strikes you, but there's an old expression, I'm sure you have it in Australia too, about how some people would sell their own grandmothers. Well now, this is an 86-year-old lady who's old and alone and ill in a condo in Honolulu, who I don't think was told that she was about to be compared to someone who says that AIDS is a conspiracy against black America. And I thought the speech myself was extremely shallow and opportunist, and I think it's created a situation where instead of having the first post-race election, we're having an election that's not just all about race, but about really old-fashioned concepts of what it constitutes.
You've made Christopher, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. You've made a series of points.
No,
let me go to one of them. It's quite interesting what you said there about Jeremiah Wright and his Jeremiad about HIV and the suggestion, in fact, that that is a genocide, that it was invented, the virus was invented to commit genocide against people of dark skin. In his speech, Obama actually refers to the fact that Jeremiah Wright has actually done a lot for HIV victims. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing that he left out that large part of the equation.
Well, I'm afraid the whole speech is a bit like that. It's if you close your eyes, so to speak, and if you just listen to the admittedly very charming and friendly, and I think, by the way, genuinely charming and friendly tones of the man, and you don't concentrate on the words or their meaning, then he can just about squeeze by. But it's all supposed to be different from that. He's supposed not to just be another smooth and silky politician. There are other reverends, by the way, from the south side of Chicago, including a really terrible guy called Meek, who was also a state senator, who I think may be about to surface as well, who make even more extraordinary remarks and even more amazing tones, and who've also been on various Obama committees. I don't think he can shake it. And the thing that worries me the most is this, that in Pennsylvania, where we're about to have another vote, where there's a big white working-class blue-collar constituency, there are going to be people who are fed up with this and who are fed up with being told that if they complain about it, they're racist. And Mrs. Clinton is faced with a rather tricky task of benefiting from that kind of resentment without appearing to do so, if I can put it like that.
William Crystal seems to have nailed this in an op-ed in the New York Times overnight, or this morning your time. He says the real question is not why Barack Obama joined this church in the first place, but why he stayed there for 2 decades when the Reverend was saying these kind of things on a regular basis.
Well, yes, and there's an extraordinary article I looked up yesterday from the New York Times of April of last year, which has a profile of the Reverend, as I suppose we have to call him, in which he says, you know, if Barack gets past the primary, he's probably going to have to disown me at some point, or at least take his distance from me. And then Wright goes on and says, and I've said that to him, and he said, yeah, it might have to come to that. Now, that means that almost a year ago, they knew they were potentially in terrific trouble. They didn't do a thing about it, which suggests to me something quite interesting, which may be only incidental to what we're talking about, but I'll mention it anyway. Suggests to me that Obama had no idea he was going to do this well. He was probably running for next time rather than this time. Suddenly, everything came good for him, and it was then too late for him to disown his original base on the Chicago South Side. And so now what this is all a terrible form of catch-up.
You made the point about selling his grandmother, and of course what he was doing there was essentially saying, well, it's not so bad, the racism you get from this fire-breathing preacher, because if you think about it, even my granny is frightened when she sees a black man approaching her on the street, and has made a few off-colour remarks in her time.
Well, you know, Jesse Jackson once said about my hometown of Washington, D.C., that when he was walking at night and he heard footsteps, he turned around, he was always relieved to find it was a white guy. That was Jesse Jackson saying that. That's not, in my view, a racist remark. It may be some kind of an admission. Any more than is the other thing with which Barack Obama suggested an equivalence, namely Geraldine Ferraro's perhaps rather sour observation that, well, being black hasn't done Obama any harm in American politics. Well, that strikes me as actually a fairly reasonable remark. Never mind the tone of voice. There are occasions on which it could be true, and that there's in no sense in any case in which it should be criminalized as a racist remark. And she disowned. The Obama campaign demanded that she be dropped from the Clinton campaign just for saying that. You see, that's also helping to stoke and build up white working-class resentment. They say, we're not going to be told that we're all bigots by someone who has a friend like Jeremiah Wright.
So clearly you
so
don't,
all this has turned very, very, very mean and nasty suddenly.
Clearly you don't believe that this is going to work, this speech, at all as damage control, and yet the speech, reasoned in tone and well-worked and long and detailed as it is, has actually gotten very good reviews in some quarters.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I'm giving you my view, but I would certainly have to say, if I haven't already, that in damage control terms, as we described them, I mean, it's been a huge success. I heard someone yesterday say it was his Gettysburg Address. I could hardly believe my ears, but I pass on this as not a completely untypical remark.
Well, it's a hell of a lot longer than the Gettysburg Address, just to start with.
The thing is, the replay of what Wright says is very, very damaging, and that's even when the speech is involved, and the more people refer to it, the more it calls attention to this guy and to the long relationship. I don't think that's something he can slide by quite as easily as that.
The interesting thing is he portrays this speech, and indeed the whole nature of the church, and he says it in some detail. He says the church contains in full the kindness and the cruelty, the fierce intelligence and the shocking ignorance, the struggles and successes, the love and the bitterness and bias that make up the black experience in America. It's a rather subtle appeal to an electorate addicted to sound bites, isn't it?
You can see what a good preacher he would have made. If you look at his book, The Audacity of Hope, I mean the second book, and as you, I'm sure, know, the title is taken from one of Jeremiah Wright's sermons. If you look at the chapter called Faith, and read the first 10 pages of it or so, you, I think, may agree with me that Obama is probably still an atheist, or at least an agnostic, that he wasn't brought up with any religious faith, rather to the contrary, that he didn't come by it naturally, but that he basically went shopping for a church when he decided to go into politics. And he thought he'd probably better pick one that was strong in the community and sort of down with the brothers. And having found that, and then having, had a meteoric success with political career in Chicago politics, it was very, very hard to walk away, because it would look then as if he was forgetting, the people who'd been his friends when he needed them.
It is, in a sense, admirable that he made this quite subtle and interesting defence of not only the Reverend but the church, whereas he could have just dumped him completely and tried to turn his back and allow it to go away. But he's sort of made a defence in which he tries to explain the bitterness and the anger as a product of decades, or more than decades, of entrenched racism and the effect it has on people like Jeremiah Wright.
But again, Tony, we must beware, I think, of doing what our profession very often does, and simply to give people points for damage control and give people good press for getting good press. I think one must be careful of that. He couldn't very well have gone for the full disavowal option, which, as I was telling you, as long as a year ago he knew he might have to use.